Well, greetings out there in YouTube land, and welcome to today's stellar video in which we will attempt to answer that age-old question: what's 80 years old and lives in an orange and gray protective case? If you're stumped, let's open it up and see. And this is a very unusual protective case in that it unzips at the top and flaps open like a picnic basket to expose the magnificent content. And what we find inside that heavily padded protective case, which certainly did its job, is the absolutely most perfect, most beautiful Gibson EH150 I have ever laid eyes on, both in person or in photographs. Some of you may recall that I did a video, a couple years ago, on a similar model that had the word Dickerson written on it, and that launched all sorts of exploration into who could have possibly owned that amp. Well, this is the same model and year, except this one is in way better shape and is completely original. Other than that top handle, which we'll discuss, the mustache handle, it is essentially flawless. Longtime viewers will know just how excited I get when I find something like this that is in pristine condition. Now, this isn't mine. It belongs actually to a local collector, and he brought it to me for a tune-up. I was very flattered, and I thought it'd be a great opportunity to invite you all to investigate this jewel with me as I check it out for the very first time. First off, the tweed, silk screening, stripes, metal grill screen are flawless. Okay, it's perfect. I bet it didn't look any better than that when it left the factory. Same with the top, and a really nice plate up here that tells where it came from. The Hunleth Music Company on Locust Street in St. Louis, Missouri. How about that? Beautiful. Okay, like I said, now that mustache handle is pretty much of a mess. They made a zippered cover for it, though, that actually looks pretty good, but what it needs is a really nice original mustache handle to bring it up to its full potential. And good luck with that, because I know the trouble I had. I ended up having to make one. Okay, so if anybody's got just a mint mustache handle out there in YouTube land, let me know. Okay, we might be a buyer for it. Let's look here at the sides. Absolutely magnificent. Now, the wood in these cabinets is actually rather flimsy, and it does tend to separate here, and you can see where a separation in the internal wood has sort of stressed the tweed on both corners. This is very typical. It hasn't torn through, but it has stressed it. Okay, also there are little indentations here along the side. We're going to have to check into that. I have no idea where those came from. And you see that the leather corner protectives are present. Now, there are several cabinet shapes for this particular model, a EH150, and from the shape you can infer the year that the amp was made. Before we continue with the disassembly and repairs, I thought it might be good to have just a brief historical review of the EH150 amp. First off, they're probably the best or finest guitar amps that were available back in the period from 1935 to 42. They were used by a bunch of big band guitarists and jazz guitarists, notably Charlie Christian. And these guys could probably afford any amp they wanted, and generally this is the one they used. There was an excellent article in Vintage Guitar Magazine back in July of '99, and I'm going to put a link in the video description if you want to read the whole thing. But it goes into detail about the 4 different models of the EH150 that were available from 1935 to 1942. Style 1 and Style 2 had slightly smaller cabinets and square corners. They also had 10-inch speakers. They were built and sold from 1935 to 1937. But the Style 3 version, which is the one we have here, really is the one that made an impact on professional musicians. It was available from 1937 to 1941. It has the rounded corners that you see here and a 12-inch speaker, which would be very important if you're performing in a large venue. As we will see, it has a unique tube complement, and instead of a phase inversion tube, it uses a transformer with a center tap secondary to achieve phase inversion, which is a high dollar and very classy and effective way to achieve it. So with that said, let's turn this jewel around and begin the dissection. And as you can see, the tweed on the back and the stripes are absolutely perfect. Looks like one of the leather corner protectors has suffered a bit here over time. We have the luggage type latches that have a big G for Gibson on them, all four. Okay, you can see the sort of the luggage type of design that they had here. I can see this laying on its front, and this being a suitcase that you're opening back in some late 30s flop house. Okay, this corner protector is a little worse for wear, so let's pop the latches and see what's inside. And we see inside the sort of reptilian grain lining of that back door the warning to only use 110 to 125 volt alternating current. As we saw in the previous video, on these late 30s amps, some homes had DC power supply. Okay, and they had, I guess they couldn't have Gibson amps. So this is a warning then, because you know darn well that if you plug this into DC, the power transformer is not going to be real happy. Okay, so now grab the smelling salts, because the interior of this thing, it's like King Tut's tomb. Okay, it is magnificent. It is perfect. Look at this. This is, I swear, museum grade stuff. We'll go over all of the controls and everything else in detail, but I just want you to witness the awe and mystery of a 80-year-old amp that probably spent 99% of its time in its zippered case, from the look of it. Look at that tag on the speaker. Too sweet. Okay, let's get started then disassembling this so that we can get a look eventually at the circuitry that awaits us inside the chassis. I see that a 3-wire power cord has already been installed, which makes me a little nervous because I'm not sure who did it. We saw in that last video that if things aren't done right, they have to be redone. I also see that instead of a nice grommet, there is a wire tie right here keeping the cord from going back in. Not really the hot setup. Okay, and as you remember from the previous video, 6L6 tubes, the metal-bodied first forms of 6L6. Okay, and then I'm going to guess on this, as I smash it into the power transformer, on this rectifier tube, well, I'm going to have to guess, because it's not written on it, but with 4 pins, I'm thinking a 5Z3 or an 80. Okay, we'll have to check. But whatever it is, I have a feeling it's the right one for the amp. But look at that globe, okay? Pretty sweet, huh? Oh, look at that, 5Z3. There it is. The ghost lettering. So I guessed right, at least, for once. Next, we see a trio of 6 C5 tubes. Now, we'll check these out in the tube handbook to see exactly what their properties are. Odds are they're triodes, but we'll wait and see. And then the first preamp tube that receives the signal on its grid cap, like we saw in the previous video, is a 6F5. All of these are very, very early tubes that odds are most of you have never encountered. But that's what we're here for. It's interesting to see that the 6F5 tube, which is used as the first preamp tube in this amp for the microphone channel, it has the grid cap on top. It was already obsolete when my tube handbook was printed in 1959. So that tells you something about how old and archaic the tubes are in this jewel. Okay, let's pull all the tubes and then remove the chassis from the cabinet so we can take a look at what's going on inside. And joy of joys, we see that Gibson in their infinite wisdom gave us a plug-in electrodynamic speaker. You've heard me bitch and moan in the past about the difficulty of trying to disconnect one of these speakers from a circuit when there's 4 or 5 wires that have to be unsoldered. In this case, we'll simply unplug it, okay, and then undo the screws on the floor of the cabinet and slide this big heavy chassis out. While I'm getting here at the bottom of the cabinet, I thought I'd share it with you. Got the original gum rubber feet, which have turned into rock pretty well by now, but at least they're original. And nice set of 4 original screws holding in the chassis, and a virtually flawless tweed bottom. So sweet. But then most tweed bottoms are. For those of you interested in the evolution of screw heads, and judging from the comments on the last video, some of you are, every screw in this one is slotted head, and I believe this is about the same vintage as that Masco amp. So I'm not sure why there were Phillips heads in it and slotted head screws in this. I think we're at a period in time here when they were overlapping, that the Phillips were being introduced and increasingly used. Now, as I'm preparing to hoist this behemoth chassis out of this cabinet, I'll draw your attention to how rather thin and flimsy the cabinet is, and why there are disturbances in the wood due to stress from lifting it up here from the handle. Really, if I could go back in time, maybe make some kind of a steel support like a horseshoe that comes around here and then lifts from the sides rather than the top. But regardless, it was Gibson's plan, I guess, and they probably would have had a hard time doing these curved shoulders if the wood were much thicker. Okay, so let's get out the truss and begin the hoist. And here, attached to the bottom, is something you never like to see, which is 2 pools of molten hardened wax. Now, it could be from a demolished electrolytic capacitor or a transformer. Let's hope it's the former, not the latter. Okay, but with seeing this, it never makes one happy. All right, everything else looks pretty good underneath here. So now let's flip this over and see what surprises await. Well, this is definitely like an archaeological dig here. Look at those cardboard box filter caps. Apparently each one is a pair of 8 microfarad caps, and that is where all the wax came from. They have simply just melted and disintegrated. It's flowed out here. That right there is probably where the lump of wax was connected. Here's what's odd is some of it defied gravity and stuck up here on the underside of the top of the chassis. Forensic blood analysis experts would have a field day with that one. As you can see, there's a couple electrolytics that have been added in here, but my fear is that these wretched cardboard caps have been left in the circuit. So it's going to take a fair amount of dissection to try to figure this out. And also, I'm kind of tempted, if I can, and I don't promise that I can get all the wax out of here, but what if the new electrolytics were hidden inside of 1 or 2 of these boxes? Okay, then when you looked in, you wouldn't be jarred by the sight of some Taiwanese capacitors. Over here, things look fair, except all the waxy caps are in place, which I guess is a good thing. Look at this one. It gave it up, okay? It just regurgitated its contents here all over this pot. I guess which is a good place for regurgitated contents. But looks like we've got some disassembly to do and some investigating, okay, to see exactly what we're up against here. But I've never done it before, but it's very tempting. If I can get these boxes cleaned out to hide those new caps inside there and then just run wires out to where they need to be. I hope I can do it. Okay, enough here for the peep show. Let's start doing some disassembly and checking things out. I believe this is the output transformer here, and this may be an output transformer for the auxiliary or what they call echo speaker. Now, in a way, that's kind of salesmanship. Echo speaker, it sounds like it's reverb or something exciting, but I think all it is it's just a remote speaker. Okay, so it's echoing back what this the main unit is doing. Okay, so a little bit of oversell there, but you can't blame them. Okay, and then this one, I don't know why you need a filter choke when you've got a field coil on your electrolytic speaker. We'll see what this is once I start analyzing the circuit. I was all excited to find a schematic for an EH150. Oh, lucky day, okay? I haven't had a schematic in about 4 years, okay? But look, not one tube other than the 6L6s relates. Even the rectifier is different. Everything about this is different. So I guess we'll put this in our spare parts bin and just go from scratch on this jewel, see what we can figure out. Okay, so come along with me for the ride. It promises to be a memorable one. Well, I undid all 4 screws. I thought I could take these out separately, but they've just welded themselves together. You can see the wax all over the place. Now, it looks like these 2 leads probably went to this, where this cap is and this cap is. And over here, the other 2 leads from the second 8-8 cap are connected still to the speaker socket. So this then is probably the reservoir capacitor for the B+ that's on its way to that speaker field coil. Okay, and this cap was left in here. As you can see, it wasn't real happy about it. So let me see with my hot air gun. First I'll disconnect these leads and mark them. And then let me see if I can get this wax off of here and clean these up and maybe use them to conceal the new components. It's about 120 degrees out in the sun, so I set the cap out there to see if that would soften it up a little bit. And then meanwhile, I'm scraping all the wax off here and trying to be real careful about it and clean all this up. And I was thinking of a great trick. If you had like a wife or a roommate or something, set this on their pillow, okay, during the night. And when they wake up, they'll think it came from their ears. As I'm cleaning up the waxy mess, I was looking over here and we can see that that 3-wire power cord wasn't installed properly. It looks like the black wire goes through the switch and the white goes through the fuse. We know that that just isn't the way it's done anymore. You want to have the black wire go through both the fuse and the switch so that you can have complete protection, because the black wire, remember, is the hot wire. Okay, so that we'll have to tend to that. All right, I moved the chassis back out of harm's way, and now I'm going to start seeing if I can melt the contents out of these cardboard boxes using the trusty hot air gun without actually incinerating the lovely antique boxes. Okay, so now the fun begins. You know, these really are just little cardboard boxes, and look at how the wax here is expanded outward and is pushing that flap open at the end of the box. Lovely, eh? Well, I can tell you the hot air gun's not going to make it because the heat is too focused. to get this hot enough to melt the wax, I probably have to burn this thing up. So I need more generalized heat like you'd find in your wife's oven. And since mine's out of town, I'm going to take this in and do the unthinkable. Okay, and see if I can't heat it up that way and get the wax to come out. Don't tell her. Okay, I've suspended the capacitors above a metal can with that open end down. I've also put a pan underneath to catch the shards when it explodes. Okay, and I'm going to try it at 200 degrees. I sure don't want to get close to the flash point for the wax and burn the house down, but you know, good old amps are worth a little risk. So let's see what happens here. Well, not much action at 200, so I raised it up to 250. Well, isn't this lovely? I got the ends of the boxes open, and look at what's inside. Pretty disgusting, eh? Boy, do I wish I'd never thought of this idea. Well, what I started in the oven, I finished up with a trusty hot air gun, and finally got the capacitors out of the boxes in all their disgusting glory. And as you can see, the boxes are pretty nasty inside, but that won't matter. But they're intact. Okay, they're in pretty good shape. So now I will put 4 new capacitors in here. Actually 3, because you remember one was parallel, so I'll put in a 20 and 2 10s. And then have wires coming out here. I'll have cloth wire coming out, and it'll look just like they were originally. And as far as these, I think I'll throw them in the neighbor's backyard and make him wonder what his dog ate to produce this. Well, here are the empty boxes ready for the new capacitors. I highly don't recommend that you do this. It makes a terrible mess, stinks up the house, probably threatens your marriage, but what the heck. Like I said, old amps make you do crazy things. So let's put some new caps in here, run some cloth covered wire out, and then reinstall them here in the chassis. Okay, I'm removing those filter caps that were tacked in here. I'm going to have to cut Geronimo's headband here and release this one. And then we can get started wiring the old boxy caps back in. Alright, here's the 2 10s. Hooked together and wired up using the original wire from the box capacitor. Now all I have to do is stuff these into one of the boxes and then run the wires out through the holes in the end flap. Alright, there is the top boxy cap. Now I have to do a 20 microfarad in the bottom cap with original wires, and we're ready to hook them up. Alright, I have the 20 microfarad cap all wired up and ready to go into this voluminous box, okay, with the wires protruding out the end, and then we'll be ready to install the boxes with nuts and bolts and wire them up. The size difference between capacitors in the old days and modern ones never ceases to amaze me. Well, here are the 2 capacitor boxes that have been stuffed with fresh new electrolytics, and the original wires come out and go to all the proper connection points in the circuit. I'd like to be the fly on the wall in 20 or 30 years when somebody opens up this chassis and looks inside and says, oh my God, how could it have worked all this time with those old boxy electrolytics? Little do they know. Well, here's a cautionary tale to all you catnip addicts. Here's Ollie. She's lost about 5 pounds. Okay, she's all strung out, sleeping in alleys right behind her there, and eating from time to time, and yawning a whole bunch. But I'll tell you, you got to kick that catnip habit. Okay, she's just a junkie, but we love her just the same. And she's also a pretty good musician. Yes, yes you are, girl. Coming here for some yummies? Okay, I'll throw a few leaves of nip in there for you. Good girl. Now it's time to face another nightmare, and that is that under this board, which is bolted to the chassis, there are several electrolytic capacitors. So this board is going to have to be unbolted and lifted up so that I can gain access to those caps and replace them. Now that may sound like an easy job, but all the wiring here will tend to interfere with this being lifted up at all. Okay, so it's generally quite a struggle, and you risk breaking some solder joints when you do it. So I'm going to have to get started and be real careful. Alright, the nuts have been unscrewed and the board will barely move at all, okay, as expected. And this is typical right here. Look at this heavy black wire running over to pin 8 on this tube. That's holding it down, so I'll have to unsolder it, as well as probably several other wires. I've made a diagram here to keep track of the connections that I separate, so that I can put it all back together. But let's unsolder this one and see what next wire prevents us from lifting the board. I had to unsolder one more of those short black wires to the board. The shorter the wire is, of course, the more it tends to hold the board down. So with those two unsoldered, I'm able to lift the board up and get a look at the electrolytics that are lurking within. Also, there's some waxy caps, of course, too. So there's, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5 that are obvious. Okay, so I'm going to continue to try to lift this side of the board up a little bit. I might have to release this transformer lead here from the board. That would help. And then start releasing these caps, figure out what they are, and then reinstalling new ones. Okay, I have the first one out. It ran from pin 3 to pin 3 under the board, and it's obviously a cathode bypass cap, 10 microfarads at 25 volts. Okay, it's an Aerovox. Alright, now on to the next one. The second electrolytic removed is the same. It's a 10 at 25 bypass cap, and it's from pin 4 to pin 4. Next one is a waxy 0.1 at 400 from pin 8 to pin 8. This is probably a coupling cap and therefore critical to be replaced. Next, another electrolytic bypass cap from pin 9 to pin 9. And finally, another coupling cap, 0.1 at 400. This one is a little tricky. It runs from 10 to 12. Now, as you can see, that's cleaned out the underside of the board. So now we can start wiring in the new replacement caps. They'll be hidden under the board, so we don't have to be tricky about trying to conceal their modern status. Alright, the board has been rewired underneath with all the new capacitors, and also while I was under there I thought, instead of replacing these with brand new ones that stick out like a sore thumb, why not replace this waxy cap and this waxy cap with brand new caps, but underneath where they can't be seen. Okay, so now when you look at the board, all you see is old components, and all the new ones are underneath and hidden from sight. On these old pots, I guess it made sense to seal them up so that dirt and dust couldn't get inside, but it makes them impossible to clean without actually disassembling them. So you've got to pull out the pot and then bend away these 4 tabs, pull the back, and then squirt in the cleaner and clean the resistance strip around the perimeter of the inside. Now with those tabs bent out of the way, you can remove the back and then expose this resistance strip. It's circular. It runs around here, and spray the cleaner on it, and make sure then that all of the oxidation and everything else is cleaned away from it. I even clean up that metal cover. These stack pole pots are of excellent quality and will probably last forever with an occasional cleaning. Now I'm going to put the rear dust cover back on, bend the tabs over, and then we'll do this pot. Well, all the capacitor exchanges and rewiring completed. Set the chassis up on its side, installed all the tubes, and plugged in the electrodynamic speaker. Now let's inject the traditional 500 cycle per second tone into first the instrument inputs and then into the microphone inputs, and see if this jewel actually works. Step 1, of course, is to see if the current limiter flashes brightly, and it doesn't, which is always a good sign. Okay, we've got our Signal generator on. I can hear a very slight power hum, otherwise the amp is dead quiet. So let's turn up the volume. Oh yeah. Now listen to how loud it is at, say, 5 on the instrument volume. Okay? Now let's change over to the microphone input, and you can actually hear the tone with a volume set at 0. Now it's infinitely louder. It's as loud at like 1.5 on microphone as it was at 5 on instrument. Now there is no schematic for this particular model of the EH150, but I have drawn one up, and we're going to review it and see why there is such a tremendous disparity in volume and how the normal and bass tone switch works. First off, let's notice the major difference between the microphone input and the instrument input. Okay, the instruments, and also you'll notice there are no grid stoppers here. I'm going to have to add them because you really need them in an amplifier like this. But you notice that the instruments come in through the instrument volume control and go to V2 here, which is a 6C5. Now the 6C5 is a triode with a relatively low amplification factor of around 20. Okay, now these two 6C5s are ganged together. Notice that the plates are connected with a single coupling capacitor. Okay, now between these two then we're going to get whatever boost they can provide to our instrument input, and then send it over here to the final stage of amplification before it goes to our interstage phase inverter transformer. Now compare that to what happens when you plug into the microphone jack. First off, there is no grid stopper resistor here either, nor can there be one when you have a grid cap tube. Now the first triode encountered by this signal coming in the microphone input will be by a 6F5 tube. Now the 6F5 is a triode like the 6C5, but has a much higher amplification factor of about 100 compared to only 20 for the puny 6C5. This is more like a 12AX7. So we're going to have about 5 times the amplification that is going to leave the 6F5 through the coupling cap, through the microphone volume control, and bypassing the first of the two ganged 6C5s, it is fed into the grid of the second one. But still, you can imagine that the amplification that the signal will receive from the 6F5 and 6C5 is going to be way greater than the instrument input signal that was augmented simply by two puny 6C5s. This explains that tremendous difference in volume that we saw when we plugged into the microphone input. The next unusual feature here is that this model of the EH150 does not have a tone control. Instead, it has a bass treble switch. Okay, now how it works is rather clever actually. Generally, this type of switch will just have a capacitor to ground, and when the switch is closed, your high frequencies go to ground and then you get bass tones, and vice versa. But in this case, you have a choice of two coupling caps. Now, I've never seen this before. I think this is pretty clever. If you have it open in the treble position, your coupling cap is a puny 0.00075 microfarads, okay, which is only going to let through high frequencies. When you close the switch, however, this puny coupling cap is bypassed by a fat, healthy 0.1 microfarad coupling cap, which can send all your frequencies then to the next 6C5 triode. Granted, it doesn't give the infinite variation that you would have with a potentiometer controlled tone pot, but it's better than nothing. okay, and as we'll see, it works fairly well. Naturally, it really forces you to use the tone control on the guitar, which is not a bad idea anyway. The third feature of this model is that it doesn't use a phase inverter tube, which is generally in the other models is a 6N7, but this uses a more expensive and actually better center tap secondary phase inverter transformer. We send our signal here through the primary, and then because this is a center tap secondary, equal but out of phase signals then will be sent to the grids of the 6L6s. I personally think this is an excellent way to accomplish phase inversion. The outputs here from the secondary are going to be perfectly matched and of opposite phase, of course. But this method requires this transformer, which is way more expensive than a simple tube, which back in the day was probably 50 cents, and a tube socket. So you don't see this very often, only in the higher grade, higher level amplifier. Well, with that very successful test behind us, I think it's time to check the bias here on the 6L6s, make sure that it's reasonable, and then we're going to slide the chassis back into the cabinet, secure it with the 4 original screws, and then turn this over to Jack and Ollie for a little audio demo. Let's take a look at the biasing numbers here for the amp. These are the resistances across each of the half windings of the output transformer secondary. That's the voltage drop. So this tube is passing 45 milliamps, this one 46. What a nice pairing, huh? Only 258 volts plate voltage, but that multiplies out to a plate dissipation of 11.6 watts and 11.9 watts, which is very, very acceptable. I'm real pleased with these results. But it's really nice matched set of 6L6s. Now with all the wiring and repair work completed, and before we button this up, let's take one last loving look at the very original looking circuit and chassis of the Style 3 Model EH1. You can see that I added period correct NOS 30K grid stoppers to both of the 6C5s just to play it safe. And all of the new capacitors are completely hidden from view. Some in the boxes and some underneath the eyelet board. So all in all, I think other than the green ground wire right here, anybody that looked at this might be fooled into thinking that it was unmolested. But molested it is. One other thing I wanted to clear up. This right here is the phase inverter transformer. This over here is the output transformer. I think I got a little mixed up in the opening analysis, and I just wanted to clear that up. Also, the output transformer has these really nice braided wires to cut down on hum. I mean, I've seen twisted wires, but braided, that's really special. Okay, so output transformer, phase inversion transformer. And this is a second filter choke besides the field coil in the electrodynamic speaker, which is probably part of why there is no hum from this thing. It is dead quiet. Before trying to slide the chassis back in, I scraped up that hideous blob of wax which came from the boxy caps. So now it's free to slide back into its place and nestle there happily for many more years to come. Well, here it is, all buttoned up and back together. You'll notice that the wire tie is missing here because now the cord passes through the grommet and is secured properly, and the primary circuit has been rewired to suit modern standards. It appears to me that it is now ready to be turned around and subjected to a stringent audio test from Jack and Ollie. You know, I just saw the amp case laying on its side like this, and it reminds me of those zippered thermal containers that the pizza delivery guys use. Okay, surely that isn't where this came from, but I guess, you know, when you're not using it to cover your amp, you could go into business delivering pizzas. When you get a whole bunch of catnip addicts like we do, you got to grow your own, okay? So we planted some, and we grow it wild here in this wild pot. And let me pick a few leaves, and then we'll see how each of the kitties responds. Okay, Casey's rolling around on hers. Jack's playing it cool. He's kind of watching what's going on. Normally he eats his catnip. Okay, Casey's just having a field day here. Oh yeah, she likes that. Wait till you see it. There goes Jack. What a... Oh, he's tough. As you can see, Jack actually eats his catnip. He doesn't roll in it. He just eats it. Good boy. Well, greetings all you ampaholics. We're out in the workshop with the mighty EH150. We got Ollie and Jack all hyped up on catnip, and we're going to play a few tunes. Alright, to start off with, I think it'd be interesting to compare the tone and volume between the microphone input and the instrument input channels. In both cases, the tone switch will be in the bass position. To be honest with you, when it's not in the bass position, the tone is rather strident, a little bit shrill, and I think too much trouble. Okay, to start off with, let's play 3 tunes through the microphone input. Now, this input has tremendous gain, so with humbucker pickups in a guitar, it really is so powerful that you have to keep the volume down to around 1. So that's where I'm going to keep it. It's still going to be plenty loud. So let's see what you think of the tone here in the microphone input channel. Now we're plugged into the instrument input with a volume setting of around 4. Now that we've heard 3 tunes through each channel, I just wanted to give you my appraisal of the difference between them. See if you agree. To me, the microphone channel sounded a little shrill. It just didn't have a whole lot of warmth or bottom end. I thought that the instrument channel at the higher volume setting sounded much better, warmer, more bass tones. Neither channel really is bass heavy at all, but I thought that the clarity and overall tone of the instrument channel was by far the best. Well, I guess that's about it for this video highlighting the restoration of a probably around 1940 Gibson EH-150. I hope you enjoyed it. I wanted to thank my Patreon patrons and PayPal contributors because you guys came through for us on another month here, keeping us on the air and advertising free. Thank you so much. Any of you out there who'd like to join them in supporting our channel, I will include links in the video description to assist you to do so. Our second feature is going to be rather unusual in that it will show some rather extensive body work that I did on a 1928 Ford Model A Coupe. Now this was the car that I traded for the little 32 truck that you saw in the preceding video. It was a really nice hot rod with a 350 Chevy engine, a TCI, complete frame and suspension. Overall, just a really good car, but as you'll see, it had a very serious drawback that had to be corrected before the car was presentable. So if this sounds at all interesting, please stay tuned to watch The Miracle on 28th Street, okay, which is immediately forthcoming. Also, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you again soon in the near future. Well, here's the nightmarish job that's going to have to be done on this car. The top is open, which is not unusual on these, but this one has a really serious issue in that it is a special coupe, so the rear part here where the window normally is wide open. Originally there was a like a cobra grain material that wrapped all the way around, which really is not available anymore, so I'm going to have to come up with some means of filling in this rear panel with a window in it. And also, originally there was some kind of trim strip that went all the way around here, and all of this with all these holes is going to have to be patched. It's going to be a huge job, far more than but I guess instead of bitching and whining, it's time to start fabricating. Well, I've been working all day trying to fill in this back panel here on the body, and I have cleaned away here. There was a piece that came out and over, took that out on both sides so that we had a perfect square corner here, and then put in a piece of angle iron and then another bigger piece of angle iron, and I cut lines in it so that it could be bent in 2 ways. It curves this way and it curves this way, and the only way to do that with a piece of steel is to cut little slots in it and then use C-clamps to press it into shape. Okay, so now the steel piece will fit butt up against these, and then I'm going to have to bend the curvature over the top, and then after all that's done, then have to cut out for the back window. Okay, we'll do more videos in the future and keep you up to date. Now I'm going to show you how I bent that 16 gauge steel that I used to make that rear panel for the cab. I've got the piece here that I cut out for the rear window. I didn't make any video of the original bending because, to be honest with you, my hands are full with that great big piece of metal, and I had no idea if this would work or not. But it did. It worked great. So let me show you how I did it. It's actually rather simple. Now my bending method is absolute Stone Age stuff, okay, but that's kind of what I specialize in. And I looked here and I saw these two pipes on this chain link fence here in my dog run, and it occurred to me, what if I put the metal in between the two pipes and then lean real hard on it and move it forward and backward and keep leaning and pushing, and sure enough I got that great big piece of metal to make a 90-degree curvature. You notice how there's almost no curvature here. I'll tell you, it takes a lot of strength and cussing and determination, but this is how I bent the metal, believe it or not. Well, using two posts in my chain link fence in the backyard, I have bent and shaped the metal with a curvature this way and this way. And then this morning I used the plasma cutter to cut out the opening for the back window. Also, a steel rib was welded in up here to maintain the proper curvature of the top edge here to match the top bows. Then that will be used to cover where the tonneau cover comes over, and is going to come down and snap along the back here and along the sides here. Okay, I've also made the wooden frame for the glass. Now normally this is steel, but I just don't have the facilities to do that. But this will be mounted inside here, and the glass will then be attached along the back. Now when this is painted to match the steel panel, it's going to look like it's all one piece, and I hope like it is original. Okay, all the dimensions and shapes, curvatures, everything are correct for a 1928 Model A. Now I painted the wood frame with flat black primer, and I've clamped it in place here, and you can see how it's going to blend right in once everything is painted the same color. I'm going to put a silicone seal in between the wood and the metal so that it's waterproof, and there'll be another silicone seal between the wood and the glass. Okay, so I think it looks fairly original. That's my intent here, is to where nobody even notices that this is a special coupe rather than just a regular coupe. Now I'll show you on the inside how that metal panel was attached. It was pressed tightly from behind so that it fit up against those two angle iron pieces that I showed you earlier. Then the angle iron was welded to the steel about every inch or inch and a quarter all the way around the back and up both sides. Now that way I didn't have to weld the sheet to the car body and cause warps and lumping and things like that. The welds then are on the inside and concealed. Next, here is that framework on the inside that has been welded with its own angle iron at the top and at the bottom, and then the glass has been silicone glued to the wood, as you can see over here from the side. I guess you can see it. And then, because it wasn't real pretty, I masked off the exact shape of the outside window and sprayed everything in here flat black, so that you really don't see what's going on in here. You know, it doesn't draw your attention. Okay, so that's how that panel was attached. You see how it rounds up over the top, and how that rib maintains the proper curvature up here where the tonneau cover is going to fit. Also, these rear quarter windows are in place and held in with an original style steel fascia molding that presses the rubber sandwich that is made with a rubber molding that wraps around the safety glass for each of these panels, and then screws into the wood inside the body. Well, that panel is in now, and the glue is pretty well dried on the window frame. And now it's time to address probably the worst problem with this, and that is that this side here of the cab rear is a separate piece from the body. It's almost like this was a roadster, and to make a special coupe, they added this top on it. But anyway, as you can see, it's just a jagged mess here with a big open gap with wood back there, which is not a good arrangement. And it flares out, and this comes way out from the side. And as you can see, there's a big gap here. So my way of fixing this is, what I did is to screw in flathead wood screws all along into that oak wood, filling the gap between the upper part here of the rear quarter window and the body of the car. Then I welded across like bridges, okay, so that the screw then filled in the gap so that I could weld the top and bottom, and then I ground it smooth, and now this piece is very securely attached to this piece, and they're in perfect vertical alignment. The rear here was a much bigger problem, however, because the gap was so wide and the alignment was so poor that what I did is to cut about a 3/4 inch wide flat piece of steel, slide it under this upper part, bring it down, and then shape it, grind it, and bend it so that it fills the gap with a perfectly smooth curvature. Now I'm going to go in and spot weld the top to the steel and the bottom to the steel, and then grind it even smoother. I'll back away here so you can see how it's going. This here, this channel will just be filled with a fiberglass reinforced filler. I thought about welding steel into it, but good God, I think that's just making a mountain out of a molehill. So anyway, we'll check this out once I get through with the welding and grinding. Okay, it's all welded, and all of the high spots are ground off, and ground rather roughly so that the fiberglass filler will have something really good to hold on to. Now, what's important if you're going to use filler, and you've got to in something like this, is that there's no motion between the two pieces or it'll crack and come out. So what I had to do here is make this really one piece of metal. Then the filler has a much better chance of staying in place pretty much forever. Speaking of which, let's put some 3M real high quality fiberglass filler on here, and then start sanding and see how it turns out. Alright, here's 2 or 3 layers of the fiberglass filler, and it has been rough sanded into shape. I've started doing these grooves here, but they're not ready for final sanding. Well, I'm going to spray some red oxide primer down here to see where all the imperfections are, so that I can do the final detail work on the filler. Well, it actually came out pretty well. I think you can see there's some imperfections here now that I'll go back and lightly sand, and the beauty of the primer is that any low spots or holes will stay kind of that reddish oxide color, and they're easy to spot. But anyway, that's how it looks at this state of the game. Let's see, back here, looking pretty good actually. I'm rather pleased. Well, here's the end result after a couple coats of primer and wet sanding, and I think you'll agree that it looks a whole lot better than it did a couple hours ago. Well, I finished the passenger side completely, and before I show it to you, let's have a quick review of how it looked before I started. Okay, here's that ridge along the edge of the top, big crack here, deep channel here with all kinds of holes, another channel coming up this way, down here, then that big separation. This is sticking out about a 1/4 inch from here, and all the way around the back. Okay, pretty darn hideous. Now let's go take a look at the... Alright, here's that place with the big open crack along the back and all the way down here, and then that big channel with all the holes in it came all the way around and up to the front. Okay, so I think you have to agree this side looks a little better than the other side. Now it's time to start on the driver's side. Now in previous views I had either blue or green awning over me so I could have some shade to work in. It was 107 degrees here, and in the sun it's probably 125 or 30, so I had to have that cover. Now this view here is without the cover. We got a little cloud protection going on here, so you can see what this looks like out in the full sunlight, and you see that those hideous channels pretty well concealed. The jagged joint down here between the rear quarter panel, a metal piece, and the body looks actually like there is no joint. That's what I was aiming for. I've molded in the back of the steel piece that was bent back there in the chain link dog run, and here you see the wood frame has been connected with a glazing compound to the metal, so it all looks like one piece and painted to match. And now you've got what looks like a fairly original Model A coupe rear cab, which is what I wanted. Something that won't draw attention, looks fairly normal. There's still some more work to be done, but I thought I'd share this with you, and I hope you enjoyed it.